One in five suffer.
Erase the stigma.
Brain difference is not a crime.
Mental health isn't just your problem.
It's our problem.
And now, Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
Welcome to Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave, except Dave is in Germany. So Dave is unable to join us today, as we all know, and we appreciate Dave's music ministry as a 10-time Grammy-winning artist with Take 6. So sometimes Dave has to do Dave superhero a cappella things, and they take him across seas. But in the meantime, I want to remind everybody always that Mental Health Monday is brought to you by NAMI and Loving Beyond Reason, and we can't bring you this incredible content without your help. So the one thing we want you to do is please text GIVE to 818-698-1021 and join our $1 Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign. That's right. $1 a day is the campaign, and it'll help us continue to bring this amazing content. Well, as usual, we look forward to Monday because every Mental Health Mondays guest has an amazing story and journey, and today is absolutely no different. Our guest today is none other than Traute Winters, which, by the way, I was very covetous of your name. I read it and I was like, that's actually pretty cool. I would love that. She's an executive director of NAMI GLAC, which is Greater Los Angeles. Like many of us in the fight to erase the stigma surrounding mental health, she comes to the table with a testimony of her own. Her father was a Holocaust survivor, and as a result of his horrible experience, he suffered from undiagnosed mental illness. We hope that our conversation today will serve to remind those watching and listening, you are absolutely not alone. When we come back, we'll be speaking with the executive director of NAMI GLAC, Traute Winters. We'll be right back. Don't move.
When Dave and Marla get together, it's hot.
Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley believe it doesn't take much to make life a little better for our neighbors, coworkers, friends, our family members, even our children who suffer with mental illness. When you support our $1 Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign, you are doing your part to erase the stigma surrounding mental illness. For just $1 today, or $1 a day for 1 week, just $7, we can look forward to a future that does not include the unfortunate and uncomfortable stares, bullying, and the subsequent isolation that our loved ones who suffer with brain differences deal with. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to 818-698-1021 to donate. $1 today keeps the stigma away. Brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley. Mental Health Monday.
Hey guys, listen up. Learn something.
As promised, we want to start right off the top by welcoming Traute Winters to Mental Health Mondays. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
So, to be honest, when I saw you on our roster to be a guest, and understood your story, I was immediately drawn. And I really want to stop first and say thank you for taking the time out to speak with us. And I know that one of the things that, I mentioned it a little bit in the intro, is that your father was a Holocaust survivor and he had an undiagnosed mental illness. And I can't even imagine the toll that it had to take. And the reason I say this is perfect timing is because I just think sometimes we only look at what seems to be obvious when it comes to mental illness. And with a war going on right now, there's going to be millions of people who are traumatized in ways that we may not even know. So this cannot be more appropriate to speak with you at this moment. So what was that like for you?
It was very difficult because I never really understood a lot of the emotions that he was going through. And I'm part of some second generation survivor groups, and there's trauma that happens with second generation of Holocaust survivors. He was a child when he was taken to Auschwitz. And
Wow.
so that was, during his very formative years. And he never, after he got out of the camps, had any type of counseling or debriefing. So he really struggled with depression. And it wasn't really till much later, towards the end of his life, that he actually officially got diagnosed with depression and went on medication. So, as a child, you don't really understand some of those things that, a parent will go through a traumatic experience and how it may influence you.
And so once he got his diagnosis, and the influence is the next question that I would have or would love for you to share. How that impact, what was that impact like for you once you were witnessing what your father was going through, which sounds like you didn't have a diagnosis. It was just you, the child, experiencing this behavior.
Yeah, I never understood it because, both my parents were from Germany. So that alone in and of itself was very different for me to have parents, of European descent. And he was almost like another child. He wasn't really like a parent to me. I felt like he was another child in the household. So it was very difficult to understand because my parents never really talked about emotions in the household or what was going on. And they didn't really talk much about his history. And when I would try to talk to him about it, he would get angry, which is very common among Holocaust survivors, not wanting to talk about it. So it was just something that you kind of internalized. And I was a very sensitive child.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I took on, as many children of Holocaust survivors do, you take on some of that parental trauma that they experienced because it's not really discussed. So you don't really understand, especially as a child,
right,
how it really is impacting you.
Well, Traute, I have another question. Was that your mother's experience as well, or was it just your father? Did they both?
It was only my mother. Interestingly enough, only my father.
Okay.
My mother actually was Christian. My father, was Jewish.
Wow.
And she lost two brothers that were forced to fight for the Nazis in the war. So my dad lost his whole family because he was Jewish. My mother's two brothers were drafted. They were forced to fight, even though they weren't part of the Nazi party. And so she lost two brothers who, didn't want to necessarily join the war movement.
Right.
And they perished on that side. So a lot of trauma on both sides of the family through growing up, during World War II. And
do you have siblings?
I do. I have two older siblings, two sisters.
Okay. So you're the baby. So talk to me about you getting to the point where did you were affected, but then did it turn for you? Obviously at some point you began to exhibit or take on some of the issues of, was it depression for you?
Yes, depression. And I remember, growing up, I grew up in Chicago and just having periods where I just felt very sad and not really understanding my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And now, living in California, I also see that the weather really affects me. So
yes.
I think I have that seasonal affective disorder syndrome, because even here, living in Los Angeles, when the weather gets gloomy for a few days, it affects my mood. So I always knew growing up, that I did have periods of sadness, but it wasn't until my adult years that I felt that it really was impacting my life and that I really needed to address it and, get a diagnosis and get on some medication.
So what I find interesting, you said previously, what prompted in your father in his later years for him to actually get a diagnosis? It seems like he was, just trying to survive who he was or what was happening to him without that. How did that come about? That you were able to get
he had retired and he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So I think that's when it finally came to light that, he was facing the death basically. And, you know, he was just talking about not wanting to live anymore. And I think, you know, some of his past history, you know, he was facing as well. He had done a testimony with the 𝘬𝘕𝘴 Foundation and talked about his story. And so he, you know, I think it was his cancer diagnosis that finally also came to light, you know, that he was struggling with depression and had been probably struggling with depression most of his life.
And so with that as a reference point for you, did you find yourself almost like, did that prompt you to say, hey, let me go and figure out what's actually happening? Did you actually take the time yourself to go and get a formal diagnosis?
No, it wasn't until a little while after that. You know, I just was not feeling myself. And you know how when you're not feeling, you know, like yourself, and you feel that in your heart, you just have that void in your heart that something's not right. And I was feeling that for a number of days, and, you know, sometimes that goes away, and, you know, but this time it was there for an extended period of time.
Pretty intense.
Yeah, it was much more intense. And I woke up one morning and I couldn't stop crying. And that's not like me.
Right.
So that at that point, when I woke up and I could not stop crying that one day, I said, okay, I need help, because this is not me. This is not right. I shouldn't, you know, be crying. And so that's when I went in and was able to get a diagnosis and get on antidepressants.
And how, and did that help? Because here's the thing I want to remind everybody as well. We say this all the time here on Mental Health Mondays. You know, the diagnosis, as we've come to know it, is really, it's not for stigma or labeling. It's just an understanding so you can actually map out help. I call it handlebars on a bike. So, you know, when you have, you know, the only way to steer the bike is to actually you have to use the handlebars. You know, so therefore it's just getting an understanding, but it's not, you know, it's not something that we want to define others by or define ourselves by. We just want to use that for a diagnosis. And Traute, that's a good point. You know, when you finally got to the point where you just were overcome with a feeling that just wasn't who you knew yourself to be, that you couldn't seem to shake, it was time for you to, you know, go and get some help. Well, we have a lot more to discuss. We're going to take a break. And when we come back from this break, we're going to find out how your life and your journey brought you to NAMI. We'll be right back.
It's time for the Mental Health Minute with Marla and Dave.
During the pandemic, the number of young adults ages 18 through 24 reporting symptoms of anxiety and or depressive disorder rose significantly in comparison to older adults, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. Prior to the pandemic, young adults were already at high risk of poor mental health and substance use disorder, though many did not receive treatment. Both those newly experiencing mental health or substance abuse disorders and those already diagnosed before the pandemic continue to face additional barriers to finding treatment due to facility closures and other availability issues. So remember, if you or someone that you know is experiencing mental health or substance challenges, please, we ask you, reach out to NAMI and or Loving Beyond Reason and ask to be connected to the resources in your area. This message is brought to you by Mental Health Monday with Marla and Dave.
Never do anything without thinking about it first.
Marla is a feeler.
I basically wear my personality on my sleeve.
But when Marla and Dave get together, it's like a match dancing with a firecracker.
So as we promised, I'm happy to get back to this conversation. So Traute, please tell me, because the interesting thing for all of us is that we all seem to have such unique journeys as to, you know, how we find our way into NAMI, whether it be for support and the loved one of a family member, I know that by the time David and I got to NAMI, I literally called NAMI my first and last breath. And what I meant by that was very clear. I felt like it's when I was at my very last breath of hope of anything, NAMI was introduced to us, and it became my first breath of hope, of understanding, and to be able to gain the resources that we needed to navigate our own journey. So listening to your journey, I know that, it's circuitous for a lot of people that they, do different things, but then they end up here. And you're being the actual being at NAMI and being at GLAC, which I know that when I came on, it was San Fernando Valley, but this is now a joint situation where lots of things have merged. And as somebody at the Greater Los Angeles, I would love to know how you got to that.
Sure. I had been working in marketing with my career, and I just felt like at the end of the day, I really wanted to make a bigger contribution. And I had been doing a lot of volunteer work. So I decided to move my career into nonprofit.
Right.
And I did work at a couple of nonprofits. And then a position came up at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I just felt like it was such an important mission. Mental health is very much aligned with suicide and suicide prevention. Many people who attempt or die by suicide are suffering a mental illness. So I took a job. I worked 6 years with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention as the Greater Los Angeles and Central Coast Area Director.
Wow.
And then after being there for 6 years, I actually took a little bit of time off and then saw the position at NAMI, Greater LA County, and it fit very much in alignment with my experience at my last position and with my interest in mental health, and that it's just such an important mission right now, and particularly with the pandemic, with
yes.
The mental health issues increasing. That's kind of how I came to NAMI Greater LA County.
So just during this particular period, it just kind of because it definitely right now is I would call it acute, for sure. And so
yes.
That path for you led you there, and then that was available. And what are some of the resources now, if you can speak with us about being able to respond to suicide prevention?
Yeah, so suicide prevention, is very closely aligned with mental health. And, they say about 90% of people who attempt or die by suicide are suffering a mental illness at the
right.
time. So it's really important that all of us become familiar with the risk factors and warning signs for suicide, because you never know when you're going to encounter someone who may be thinking about suicide. And suicide can, suicide ideation can really come up in many different ways. Oftentimes people will talk about wanting to die by suicide. And even if they're joking about it, it's really important to take it seriously. That with their mood, you might see a change in behavior. So if over about a 2-week period, someone's behavior is abnormal for them, so
right.
maybe they're isolating or they're stopping activities like golf that they might have been involved in, or behaviors like giving away prized possessions. So if someone's, exhibiting a change in behavior that's abnormal for them by over about a 2-week period, it's really important to have a conversation with them and ask them directly if they're thinking about suicide, because it's not going to put the idea in their head if they're not already thinking about it. And even if they're not thinking about suicide, maybe they are depressed or
suffering,
struggling with a mental illness. There is sometimes when people may not even, exhibit those overt warning signs, but sometimes, you have a feeling in your gut that something's not right with someone or something's off. And, it's also really important to trust your gut and to reach out and connect with someone and ask them, how they're doing. Are they, going through a difficult time? Are they thinking about suicide? We all need to, be there for each other, connect them with resources, and, really reach out if you see someone who you feel is struggling.
I have a question, because I was going to ask you that. Could you give us some actual tips of some of the signs that we should actually begin to intervene or make suggestions? What would you say would be some of the things we probably shouldn't? Are there kind of no-nos as to how what is that?
Don't try to minimize someone's feelings, because that just invalidates them. So don't say, oh, you'll be okay, it's just a phase, or really take it seriously, because if you try to minimize someone's thoughts, that's really not helpful to them in a time where they really need a listening ear and someone to really help them, potentially to resources. So, really take people's, behavior and words seriously, and don't minimize how they're feeling. It's important that you validate how they're feeling and, help them through to resources so that they can get the help they need before they do get in severe crisis.
Are there levels of stress, episodic or intensity? Like, in other words, if there's someone around me that I suspect, is it ever up to me, the supporter or the one intervening, to actually call on behalf of? Or is it always something that you need to get the one who is actually suffering and speaking of suicide to actually take that initiative on their own?
Well, I think it's important that you, especially if they have a plan, and you can ask when you're thinking of doing it or how, and if they have a plan in place, it's important that you do not leave them alone. So, if they're just thinking about it and they don't necessarily have a plan or a timeline, then it may not be as imminent potentially. But if they have a plan or a timeline, that you do not want to leave them alone. One great resource is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can text talk to the crisis text line 741-741. And the Suicide Prevention Lifeline will help you, guide you through what to do. And you can call with the person as well. If it is imminent, like there is a suicide attempt in progress, then you definitely want to call 911. And something to also mention is as of July this year, there's going to be a new...
I was going to ask you about that, the 988 hotline, yes.
The 988 number. So that's coming in July of this year, and that's going to be nationwide. So right now, many times people call 911 for a mental health crisis, and our law enforcement isn't always trained on how to respond to a mental health crisis. So it's going to be really great that we now have the 988 resource, because then the person on the other end will know it's a mental health crisis, and they might assign a crisis mobile response team and mental health professionals. If there is a need, in terms of weapons or things involved, they may involve law enforcement. But that's something that is really exciting, that is something that's going to be available, 988. And also, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline long 1-800 number is going to turn into 988. I mean, it's difficult to remember
exactly
number when you're in crisis. So you can remember 911 or 988. So that's something that's really exciting that's coming.
Super exciting. So July, remember that, and we'll recap that before we leave. But 988 is a new number for suicide prevention that will be available like 911. Don't move.
And mental health. It doesn't just have to be any mental health crisis. It's expanded to be much bigger than just a suicide prevention number. It's also now for any mental health crisis.
Okay, we'll be right back with more Traute Winters, the Executive Director for NAMI GLAC, after this break. Tony, it's really sad that I have to objectify myself and do the dance for the poll. Okay, fine. If Dave was here, I would He always makes me do the little pole dance. It's so lonely.
I'll do it.
We want to see that. Next time, come dressed appropriately and we'll see your pole dance. Okay, so Traute, are you listening?
I am.
Okay. Here is the question that we also asked our guest last week. You're going to get to answer too, but the next one you're not going to find out till next week. So the poll question last week was this: over 20 million people over the age of 12 having experienced a substance use disorder last year. How many of them reported receiving treatment? 10%, 23%, or 37%? Do you need a repeat of the question?
I'm going to say 20%.
No. And it's
10.
okay. It's 10. It is 10.
Yes, I was going to say 10 or 20.
It's 10%, and that's okay. So the poll question next week, because to be honest, last week our guest did not land that either. They'll be watching this week going, they're in good company. Having risen from just 11%, what is the percentage of U.S. adults that reported symptoms of anxiety and or depressive disorder last year? 17.3%, 24.8%, or 31.6%?
31.6.
Well, that is an amazing answer, and we'll find out if you're right on next week's show. So you have to be sure that you tune in. Yes. So we want to remind everybody again, please text GIVE to 818-698-1021. It's a campaign. $1 today keeps the stigma away. Help us keep Mental Health Mondays coming and keeping this great content alive. You know, none of us are alone. And so we appreciate that, and we appreciate you in advance for your help. We'll be right back. Okay, I want to just recap the very last thing that we said, because I think that is just profound. Again, it is in Traute, July, that we expect to have the 988 mental health hot. It's really not. It's an emergency line, like 911. That's what it is. 411 is information. 911 is generally a first responders emergency button, and now we're going to have 988, which I think is brilliant, as I've had to call multiple times myself. And I think that that's awesome, because it's also going to be very instrumental at being able to delineate what this emergency is in regards to. And that's really amazing. Well, it always goes by super quick. I have to just say thank you, number one, your contribution to NAMI and to anyone who is in a position of needing help, suffering. I know I've been a recipient, and now I'm honored to be able to join forces and voices with so many that are sharing your journeys, yours included. And I want to leave you with the floor for the final message. So what final message would you want to leave everybody with?
Well, first of all, I'd love to invite everyone to our NAMI Greater LA County Walk that is May 21st downtown in Grant Park. We're going to have an amazing program. You can register at no cost at namiwalks.org/LA County. And also, I want to leave everyone with, we all have something, as Oprah Winfrey says. So don't hesitate to reach out and be there for others. You never know what someone's going through. Trust your gut, and let's all be there for each other. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. And thank you again for your amazing story. I'm going to look forward to, I'm keeping up, hearing more. And again, to reiterate, David and I have participated, and, unfortunately, COVID derailed a lot of us, but the NAMI Walk is amazing.
In person,
yes,
after 2 years.
Absolutely. So I do as well want to echo what Traute Winters is telling you. And again, thank you for your direction. And for all of you watching, make it to the walk. And it's downtown Los Angeles. And it's May
21st.
May 21.
Saturday.
And it's just one of those things that I'll be totally honest with you, you do not want to miss. It's informative, it's a good time, and it's an event that you don't want to have to look on your social media and see it in retrospect. Show up to the walk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and for all you guys do.
No worries. We'll talk soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye, guys.
and unfiltered.